The modern Indian Army evolved from the creation of guard groups by the British and French East Indian companies in the 17th century. By the mid-18th century, Stringer Lawrence was put in charge of the East India Company's now armies, allowing Indian soldiers to be trained by British officers. By 1830, the company armies had been expanded to 37,000 Europeans and 223,000 Indians. These Indian soldiers that were known as sepoys from the Hindi word sipahi were largely split into three presidencies to provide control for the East India Companies in Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. The number of soldiers made India not only one of the largest soldier suppliers to the British Empire, but one of the largest weaponry suppliers as well due to the saltpeter network established. Although impressive on paper, these armies were largely ill-equipped and unprepared for fighting. This would remain largely the same until after the revolt of 1857. The origin of the Mexican military grew from a blend of the pre-colonial ideologies from Aztecs and similar native groups and the implementation of the training brought from the Spanish Peninsula. Prior to Mexico's independence, the military mainly filled the role of the colonial suppressor. During the struggle for independence, the devotion of the military and its leaders largely decided the revolution. While the road to independence was difficult from 1810 to 1821, when Agustin de Iturbide was sent by Spain to put down Guerrero's revolt, he decided to side with Guerrero instead, leading to the recognition of Mexico's independence. This army allowed Iturbide to be declared emperor for a year until he was stripped from office, after which military leadership in Mexico was centralized under the new emerging government. One of the more important transitions for the military was the doing away with forced conscription to fill military numbers with undesirables. Upon moving away from the Spanish ideology, the army started to truly become Mexican in not only its mannerisms, but in its makeup as well. It wasn't until after the revolt of 1857, when the Crown took control of the forces in India, that the Europeans there and the sepoys were refined into a working army, largely split between regions to put down various uprisings. Before the turn of the century, the Indian Army was created in place of the presidency armies that had previously existed. By 1900, the amount of sepoys had been decreased in the army and the amount of British increased so that the refined armies stood at about 250,000 strong. When the Great War broke out, the Indian Army had changed little since 1900. However, the demand for soldiers by the British swelled the Indian ranks to the point that by the end of the war, 300,000 Indian soldiers had been sent to Mesopotamia and more than 1 million soldiers were sent abroad. However, even with this massive increase in troop numbers, it was not until the 1930s that Indian troops saw the first taste of leadership in officer roles, after British troops and officers had been harshly criticized for massive unnecessary expenditures.
Like all soldiers, Indian troops were expected to risk their lives, but received neither the same pay nor living conditions as their British counterparts.
पे में बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क था, रहने सहने के लिए बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क था। हमारी तो बारगाहों में पक्का फर्श भी नहीं हुआ करता था। हमें तो गोबर मिट्टी से रोजाना लीपना पड़ता था और उनके लिए पंखे भी लगे होते थे, हर किस्म की सुविधा होती थी, हमारे लिए कुछ नहीं होता था।
When World War II kicked off, the Indian Army again grew with recruits to the extent of more than 2 million by the war's end, 340,000 of which helped defeat the Japanese in Burma. More than 620,000 Indians served overseas in both naval and air forces, a strategical growth from the First World War. Another key increase was the growth of the officer corps, which arose from a mere 600 to more than 14,000, creating an Indianization of the leadership in the armed forces. However, although great strides were made for the Indian military in both wars, they were merely used by the British in the toughest fighting and very often very ill-equipped.
These pictures show the Japanese using Indian prisoners for target practice. Those who survived the ordeal were bayoneted to death.
By 1945, Britain was exhausted and bankrupt and lacked either the will or the resources to maintain its empire, leading to the eventual decision of Indian independence. However, with Indian independence came India's partition and the creation of Pakistan. After this, the Indian Army was split into the Indian and Pakistan armies, with roughly 2/3 remaining in India due to its secular nature. Only a few years after Mexico's independence, Texas declared its independence and the northern frontier of the new nation. After Mexico's army was defeated from Texas, U.S. President Polk used increasing hostilities to declare war on Mexico in 1846 in order to expand U.S. territory. After the land loss, the military was used to decide leadership of the government, throwing a coup d'etat to oust unfavorable leaders. Due to this, European forces led by the French sought to retake Mexico, an attempt that failed miserably when Mexico forces managed to rout a superior French military. Until 1910, the military largely stayed out of the government due to the strong leadership of Porfirio Diaz. When Diaz decided to stay in office past his term, Francisco Madero declared Diaz to no longer be president and that he had taken his position. This, along with land issues, turned Mexico into a free-for-all, with multiple regions led by legendary leaders such as Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, to name a few. After all of the militant groups finally became unified with the revolution's end and with General Alvaro Obregon's presidency, the military no longer played the role of the greatest tool of a dictator, but became what it sees itself as, the silent and anonymous guardian of the nation. It stayed this way until General Camacho could officially remove the military from politics in 1940 by working to institutionalize it. Today, the Mexican military exists in a similar manner and makeup as the United States Armed Forces. By using this organizational pattern, the distance between the military and the government has greatly increased to prevent further heavy-handed rulers that were previously generals take power.